Hi everybody, welcome to this week's tutorial. It is on the carrying capacity of ecosystems, and what an interesting term, carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is an interesting thing to refer to. Let's say this real fast. The objective is to use mathematics to explain the factors that affect carrying capacity of ecosystems at different scales. Now, what things can affect the carrying capacity? What are the factors? And that's a really important word there. What factors affect the carrying capacity of ecosystems at different scales? So factors is probably the most important word, but let's discuss carrying capacity real fast. What is it? Well, its capacity has to do with volume of something. It's a number of things, the capacity of whatever, and in this case it's the capacity of the ecosystems. But what is the carrying capacity? What does that mean? Well, in this case it means how much population can an ecosystem have before it gets out of control? Can it, or before it gets too much for the ecosystem to maintain, not out of control? It's kind of the opposite of that. How much carrying capacity can of a population of something can the ecosystem maintain? Now remember, there's tons of populations in ecosystems. We're going to talk about that again in just a minute. But ecosystems are full of thousands of different populations of species living next to each other and living with the other species. And so we're going to be looking at the factors that affect that. And I'm going to ask you a question in just a second that kind of clears all this up. We're also going to be talking about different scales. We're going to be talking down to, very small scale. Just as an example, the size of a small pond out in a field, all the way up to an ocean. Okay, they do get smaller. Ecosystems get smaller than that. Technically, the intestines of your body is an ecosystem, but we're not going to get that deep in depth. But we're going to be talking about different scales. But the factors are what's important here, and so there are factors that limit the carrying capacity of ecosystems, and guess what we call them? Limiting factors. And I always teach limiting factors by saying this: when I get up in the morning and go outside to my Jeep to head to work, what keeps me from getting eaten alive by a polar bear? And my students always come back and they tell me all kinds of interesting things, and there's a very obvious first one. The reason that when I live in South Florida, and the reason that in South Florida I don't get eaten by a polar bear is because it is too warm. And so one of the limiting factors of the carrying capacity of polar bears in the South Florida ecosystem is that it's warm. In this case, it's so warm, it's too warm that the carrying capacity is zero. Okay. Another one is that if we were to change it from polar bears to, say, black bears, which can live in Florida, they've been right by my house. How come there aren't just hundreds of them teeming around my house? Well, because there's not enough food, right? So it takes a large amount of food to keep a bear going, and so as a result, there can only be so many bears in the ecosystem. This is what we mean by the limiting factors, and we're going to apply that a lot here. So the first thing we need to do is talk about populations. What are they? Well, typically, scientists use the term population to describe a group of anything that is the same species living in any given area. For example, here we see whatever these are. Let's call them black buck or something. I don't know what they are. But here there is a population of these deer-like organisms. They're living in this area, this field, although surely it's larger than that. But is that all of them? No, that's just the ones that are living here. It's this population. There's another population over there. There's another population over there. And so populations are two things. It's all of the same species, and they're living in any given area. I like to talk about bass in Lake Okeechobee. Can you think of all the bass in Lake Okeechobee? Yes. Is that all the bass in the world? Absolutely not. That just happens to be all the bass in Lake Okeechobee. That's the population of bass in Lake Okeechobee. Lake Istapoga, Lake Kissimmee, the pond out behind my house, they all have a different population. Now, interestingly enough, a population is also defined as them being the species, the members of that species are available to reproduce with each other. It doesn't mean that they necessarily do reproduce with each other, but they're available. There's nothing really keeping them from reproducing with each other. And in fact, one of the ways that we define a population is by looking at the factors that keep them from reproducing. When we talk about populations, we like to talk about things like population size and distribution. Population of size is easy. Go to a spot, count your population. And so, is it possible to go count all the bass in Lake Okeechobee? It's possible. It wouldn't be easy, but it's possible. A long time ago, I did work for alligator management for state of Florida, and that's one thing we used to do is go out onto Lake Okeechobee, and we divided into areas. So we didn't count all of the lake, but I guess you could have added them all together, but we would count the number of alligators that we saw in this given area. And since we knew we didn't see them all, we kind of estimated, but that's what we mean, the population size. How many alligators are there in this given area? That's the population size. Now the distribution means a little bit different. You know, where do they fit? And we're going to look at distribution again in just a minute in the next slide. But where are they at in these given areas? And one way that we can measure distribution is by something called density. Population density is pretty simple. Okay, the formula is right here, and you can see it. It is. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Hang on. There, that ought to be better. The population size is a very simple number. I'm sorry, the population density is a very simple number. The size of the population, whatever you're counting them in, divided by the area, and the area can be defined as lots of things. Sometimes it's square inches, sometimes it's square centimeters, meters, kilometers, square miles. But you have this area, and remember, area is always measured in squared. It's something squared, miles squared, kilometers squared, inches squared, but the population size is in that area of square whatever, how many organisms live there. And in this case, if we had 100 square meters, that's a 10 by 10 meter by 10 meter, or about 30 feet by 30 feet. If we counted 1,000 beetles, 1,000 divided by 100, because it's 100 square meters, 1,000 divided by 100 is 10 beetles per square meter. Very simple math, but you need to be able to do it, and that's population density. Now, they're not always evenly distributed, and so that's something interesting about populations, is that they tend to have a specific pattern depending on what kind of organism they are. And there are three main patterns, although there are a lot of sub patterns, but three main patterns for these organisms. Now remember, we're only talking about one species here, okay? In any given area, there may be thousands of species living there, and we're just going to be talking about one. So there are these patterns for how they're distributed, three main ones. The first one is called uniform, and a uniform distribution is going to be found when things try to get as many things as there is that you can in any given area, but they have to have some space. Pine trees tend to do this. Pine trees are really good about this. They grow fairly close to each other, but there's only so close they can get. But then they cram themselves in there, and they tend to get a fairly uniform pattern. This is common among all kinds of things, and in fact I think you're going to be doing an exercise trying to determine this, so I don't want to give too much away, but this is what's called uniform. They're just kind of evenly distributed, and I know there's some missing, but in general they look evenly distributed. Compare that to clumped, which is where they cluster together or clump together, and this can be done for various reasons. More than likely, wherever they clump, there is a resource there that is important for the organism. In this case, I like to think of oak trees, because oak trees tend to clump together like this for various reasons. A lot of times it's a lower area where it tends to stay wetter longer, so the trees grow there. It could very well be the opposite. It could be a higher area that keeps them out of a flooded piece of property, and it's the only place that they can grow without being constantly flooded, but they tend to clump together. Animals do this, plants do this, bacteria do this, lots of organisms do this, and it like in uniform distribution, the resources that they need tends to be everywhere, so there's nothing really keeping them from spreading everywhere. But in clumped, the resources tend to be in those areas where they clump around. So in these areas where there aren't any, it's usually suggesting there aren't resources for that particular species. And then finally, random distribution is important, because it generally means that like in animals, that the animals are moving around looking for resources. If you're talking about plants, it means that they can do pretty well, and so they tend to kind of spread around, and there's plenty of resources, but they aren't growing in a uniform pattern like pine trees, but they may be growing like palm trees. They may be just growing wherever the seed lands. Now they may not be doing so great. I mean, these right here may be doing better because it looks like there might be resources there, but this guy out here is growing because you don't really have much of a choice when you're a plant. Wherever the seed lands, that's where you better start growing. He may not be doing as well as these, but there is a kind of a random dispersion. Other organisms do this as well. Bears, leopards, that kind of thing. Typically you find this in what's called a solitary species. If you were to zoom out and look at all of Florida, this could be a pattern of where you might find black bears. and it just happens to really coincide with where the resources are, or at least where you're going to find the resources. Okay. Now, so there are some things that talk about define how populations grow, and then there's some limits. Now, this should be pretty obvious, but I want to throw three things at you. The birth rate, that's how fast things are being born. That's always going to increase the population. The death rate is how fast things are dying. That's always going to decrease the population. So, two big things that affect the population in any given area. Remember, any given area is how fast things are being born and how fast things are dying. Okay, but then you got to throw in this idea of migration, because things migrate in and migrate out. Even though it sounds the same, immigration and immigration are two separate things. Immigration here means there are organisms moving into the population. Immigration with an E means there are organisms leaving. And whenever organisms move from one population to the other, both things are happening. You're immigrating away from one population and immigrating with an I into another population. It's really easy to remember. E is exit, I is into. It's pretty easy to remember. But these are the things that mostly affect the population of any given, or the size of any given population. How many organisms are being born, how many organisms are being dying, how many organisms are coming in or going out due to migration. In most cases, migration has the least effect on a population, because populations do tend to stick together. But sometimes it happens. Migration, seasonal variation, not hooping cranes, but sandhill cranes here in Florida are a great example. There are two types of sandhill cranes here, and you can't really tell the difference, except some of them live here year-round and some of them migrate. And so the population every year goes up and down depending on how many migrate back towards Oklahoma. And so at certain times of the year there's tons of sandhill cranes, and at certain times of the year there's only a few. And it affects the population. Now, something else we were going to talk about is that idea of limiting factors. I've already thrown that at you, but a limiting factor is any factor that keeps a population from growing out of control. One of the reasons there aren't black bears just roaming my neighborhood and killing everybody that steps out of their front door is because there's not enough food to keep them alive. And there's other reasons as well, but there's not enough food to keep them alive. We can't just have, black bears teeming through the neighborhood. In fact, bears are very interesting when it comes to population dynamics, because it takes a very large amount of land to maintain a single bear, because bears are the top predators. They are omnivores, but they do tend to eat from higher up on the food chain. And if you remember that food pyramid, the higher you go, the more of the land, the producer level, it takes to keep you alive. So bears are not as common as you might say fish, because it takes a lot of fish to keep a bear alive. And so there has to be less bears, and it's just that simple. So here are some limiting factors, some basic ones. The first one is resource availability. It's almost always universal. Practically everything in nature is barely hanging on. How much food they can have, and their population tends to hit right up there. They tend to keep adding to the population until they're just barely not starving to death, because they want to have as many offspring as possible, but then that adds more to the population. That's more that has to eat, and it creates competition. So bears, fish, trees, you name it, tend to hit the upper limit of their resources availability, of the food that's available, for example. And that, don't forget, there's shelter, water, a lot of abiotic factors. Food is a biotic factor, but there's always one. There's not always, but usually for each species there's one, and that one is what keeps them from growing out of control, but they always get right to that point. Another one is predators, and predators is interesting because predators can be a limiting factor in any given area, but then they can also leave. Predators tend to move around, and so with enough predators you keep the prey population in check, and so it's really interesting that there's always kind of an up and down cycle. If the number of predator goes up, the number of prey goes down. If the number of predators go down, the number of prey goes up. If the number of prey goes down, the number of predators go down, and the number of prey goes up, then the number of predators goes up. It's just, but that is a limit. If the number of prey species go down, the predators run out of food, and guess what? Their numbers go down, and it's just a constant thing. And reproduction also. Successful reproduction is not always easy, especially depending on things like food and resources and predators. All this puts pressure on, especially a female. But it's kind of funny. If a bear produces 4 cubs in their lifetime versus 5, then that bear is much more successful. But there are things that limit it from growing out of control, and there's all kinds of things, and it's basically what limits reproduction. So these are limiting factors. These are things that keeps the population from running out of control. And I know sometimes you think to yourself, yeah, well, is there a limiting factor on like mosquitoes or something? And there actually is. We don't have mosquitoes year round. And so there's a whole climate thing, and there are regions where there's more or less mosquitoes as well, and that tends to have to do with predators, right? So, yeah, everything has limiting factors. Every living thing on Earth has limiting factors. Humans have limiting factors. We're just very good at figuring out what they are and defeating them, but we have limiting factors. In fact, food is one of them. I mean, food and fresh water are things that we're starting to run out of on this planet. There's darn near 7.5 billion people on the Earth, and they all want to do silly things like eat food and drink fresh water, and that is starting to become a limiting factor. There's just not enough food, but we then keep figuring out with technology, science, agriculture, we actually start figuring out how to feed more people. And as it turns out, we actually got enough food to feed everybody right now. So if there's people in this world that are hungry, it's not because there's not enough food. It's more like it's because there are other factors keeping them from eating. There's a lot to limiting factors. Interestingly, all populations have a maximum limit. We've already kind of talked about that. What's the maximum limit? But they have a minimum limit. And interestingly, this minimum viable population is what's the least number of animals, of members of the same species, that can it take to keep that species going and maybe one day come back and thrive without them going extinct. And it's surprising. It takes a lot. You can't get down to like 3, because if you get down to like 3, that's not enough. Hardly any species can recover from having only 3 members left in the entire population of the whole world. So it takes a large number. Now, interestingly enough, you guys know what these are. These are bald eagles. In the American bald eagle population in the entire United States, technically the entire world, at one point in the early 1960s had dropped down to about only 1,000 birds left in the entire world. And that's a very low number. It's a frighteningly low number. It could have gone lower, but not much. And if it had gone too low, that would have been it. That would have been the end of it. Another example of these would be the condor. The condor is actually listed as extinct because its number got so low that there was just simply no way. But we'll talk about how these things can be conserved later. But when we noticed that the bald eagle population was dropping, we noticed, whoa, we got to do something about this. I mean, this is our national bird, but for other reasons we conserve things. And so we started looking at the bald eagle population. We found out that there was something causing it, and it was a chemical called DDT that was used as a pesticide, and the birds would eat the pests, and then it would build up inside of them, and they couldn't lay eggs because it made the eggs fragile and the eggs would crack. And so the bird population dropped. Well, almost immediately, and for a lot of other reasons too, because DDT was some pretty bad stuff. We banned DDT, and almost instantly the numbers started coming up, and now we're back up to about 70,000, which is a decent population. They're not really in danger of going extinct, so I think they may still be placed on the endangered species list, but only because it's better to protect them than to take them off, even though they could come off of the endangered species and go into the threatened list. There were other things too. Now that I say that, farmers would shoot these birds because they eat like their livestock. The small, like if you're raising pigs or something like that, they would eat them, and so farmers would shoot them. But now I'm telling you, do not shoot a bald eagle, because it will show you what the underside of the prison looks like. And there are a lot of examples of that, manatees and panthers and things like that. These are things that live in Florida. The California condor had gone completely extinct, although completely extinct didn't mean totally gone, because as it turns out, I think there were 7 members of the species left, and we had to do some pretty radical things to save them, but we actually pulled them away from the brink of extinction, and now there is a population of condors living in northern Arizona. Now they're native to California, but they're cliff dwellers, and their habitat was becoming endangered because people wanted to build right there where they lived, and so they were down to next to nothing, and they were captured. They decided at one point, you know what, we'll just capture all the ones that are left, and we'll put them into this rehab facility and keep them alive. And they had this whole breeding thing, and I mean, it was really weird how much they had to do to keep these things alive. But they started releasing them around their Grand Canyon in northern Arizona. As it turns out, I don't know how many we're up to, but the population is increasing, and I've actually seen one in the wild, which is an insane thing to be walking along and all of a sudden you see a California condor. And I was there around the Grand Canyon. It's crazy, you know. Survivorship curves are interesting because survivorship curves talk about how an individual member of a species lives its life. And so this is important to know because there are three types of survivorship curves. And I want you to try to figure out which one humans are. Type 1 is the survivorship curve in which almost every member of the species survives until they get very old, and then they all die. Okay? So the population stays pretty high. The members of the population keep going, staying very high, and then they fall down, right? Type 2 means that they all die, or everything dies just when it happens. Some die young, some die middle, some die old. Okay, and then finally the type 3 population curve is when most organisms die young, but the ones that survive tend to live a very long time. And so, which one do you think humans are? I hope you said type 1, because that's exactly what is the case. Humans tend to live for a very long time, and then they die, right? But think about, I always like to think about Finding Nemo here. Think about all of Nemo's siblings. I mean, most of them died young because of that barracuda attack. But then once it survived, that meant that it had what it took to stay alive. And, then they'll live quite a while. Those clownfish do live for a long time comparatively. Type 2 is just any kind of, birds typically follow a type 2. Some of them die young, some die middle-aged, some die old. When you're going through this, if you want to, you can click it and it will tell you what these things are. So those are the survivorship curves, and every species usually follows one of those three. Okay, so then that leads us to carrying capacity, which is what the whole point was. That's the title of this thing, is the carrying capacity of ecosystems. Well, carrying capacity is pretty simple. What's the maximum number of population that a particular habitat can sustain indefinitely? And this field out in that looks like Wyoming, maybe, this large field, God knows how big it is, but it can sustain that many buffalo, right? Biologists use the letter K to symbolize carrying capacity. I don't know why, couldn't begin to tell you why, but K equals carrying capacity, and environmental conditions and resources determine a habitat's carrying capacity. Could we get more buffalo here? If we found this herd of buffalo naturally out in the wild, and if somebody were to say, can we get more buffalo, you would have to say no, because this is how many nature said can go here. But could we artificially fix that? Sure. We can start putting fertilizer on the ground, get the grass a little bit greener. Greener grass means more buffalo babies, and more buffalo babies means more buffalo. But that's artificial, okay? And or maybe we could start bringing in mineral supplements. Those big old tubs of mineral, and let them have that, because maybe there's some type of nutrient that's deficient that they can't grow so fast, or there's all kinds of things that limit them. Remember, limiting factor, right? There's always a limiting factor keeping them from growing out of control. How come this isn't just full of buffalo? Because there's some limiting factor, and it's probably food. But limiting factors define the carrying capacity, and it's always something: food, water, sunlight. But carrying capacity isn't a fixed number. It can go up or down, just depending on time usually. But time usually, there's more resources here, there's less resources there. A drought could cause there to be less food, which means the population has to go down. Or you could have years of really quality rainfall and years of good grass production, which means the population is going to go up. There's all kinds of things that affect it, but carrying capacity isn't a fixed number. And for example, something humans do, if we go in and we chop down a large part of the forest, it shrinks the size of a forest, and therefore fewer animals are able to live there. That's temporarily, though, because if we leave it alone and the forest comes back, then that number goes back up. The concept of carrying capacity explains why populations don't grow indefinitely, but they tend to stabilize over time. This field can generally handle this number of buffalo, and has been that way for thousands of years. And if left alone, it'll probably handle that much buffalo on average over a long period of time. It'll go up and down depending on drought, depending on predators and that sort of thing. But in general, it'll handle about the same number of buffalo, and that's the way carrying capacity works. I have a whole lecture on human carrying capacity, but we're not going to have time on that. Suffice it to say is our carrying capacity here on Earth is artificially high, way high, for what the Earth could probably handle without us artificially fixing it. And it's artificially kept high by using petroleum, but that's another day. So here's an interesting graph. Here is the carrying capacity. It is set here, whatever that is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's say that's 6,000 individuals. We'll say buffalo. 6,000 buffalo can live in the state of Wyoming, right? And that's because the carrying capacity is there. That's because it's the same kind of grass, the same climate and everything. Nothing's really changed. But there's two types of growth models. If we were to introduce buffalo to some place that never had buffalo before, two things could happen. The exponential growth model, that's the J-shaped model, is that they grow out of control. They grow like crazy. Their population skyrockets and overshoots the carrying capacity by a lot, right? And guess what? It always comes back down. And the further up it goes, the harder it comes back down, and the further down it goes. J-shaped curves are reserved for organisms like mice or things that reproduce very rapidly. They can reproduce rapidly, mice, bugs, things like that. This year they're having the cicadas attack all around the Atlantic coast. And every 7 years these things grow like crazy because they wake up and they decide, oh, this is the year we get to have a bunch of babies. And so then the next thing you know, there's just cicadas everywhere. That's a J-shaped curve. Now the thing is, right now these cicadas are going crazy. Their population is way overshot the carrying capacity. But there are things that are causing that population to start to fall again. There's tons of predators. The birds up there are loving it because they eat the cicadas like crazy. There's not enough food, so eventually they're going to run out of food and a lot of them are going to die. It's going to get cold here again, and it'll get the rest of them. But they have what's called a J-shaped curve. Now the logistic growth model is one that usually is because it has a much slower reproductive rate, and that shows a population increase, but as it approaches the carrying capacity it tends to level off, and it will level off here. Now there's lots of reasons for that, but it mostly has to do with the long term, over time, populations just level out because they have to, and they want to level out right around the carrying capacity. You want to have as many as you can have, because that's how you maintain a healthy species. But the S-shaped curve is interesting because sometimes it goes above the carrying capacity, and when it does that, guess what? It has got to get back below, and it never comes right to it. It always goes up and then comes back down below, and it's going to go up and down, up and down, up and down, but it tends to stabilize around that carrying capacity. Most organisms follow an S-shaped curve, and in fact really over time a J-shaped curve will become an S-shaped curve, assuming nothing crazy happens like those cicadas, which only come around once every 7 years. But here's the interesting thing: that carrying capacity is controlled by the limiting factors. And suppose a new limiting factor comes in and changes the carrying capacity down, or suppose that one of the limiting factors becomes more extreme and pulls that carrying capacity down. What has to happen to the population? It has to go down. So let's just real quick, just to scare you, give you a whole kind of a purge kind of a feeling. Right now the human population is sitting somewhere just under 8 billion people on the earth, but up until 1900 the population of the earth was way down here, only at about 1 billion. It never gone over 1 billion until sometime around the 1900, or sometime around the year 1900. Okay, and all of a sudden in 100 years it went from never having gone above a billion to all of a sudden up here at almost 8 billion. And there's lots of reasons why, but the main one, technology, science, that sort of thing, but the main one has to do with mining petroleum. Coal, oil, and natural gas has given us the ability to maintain a much higher population. Well, let's just suppose that one day the scary stuff happens and all of a sudden we run out of oil. What's going to happen to that carrying capacity? It's going to go back down here. What has to happen to the population? It's got to go back down here. And when that downward fall, man, that's like whole, Walking Dead kind of purge kind of thing going on. But it will go back down. It just simply cannot avoid it. And everything has to follow this pattern. Humans just have artificially controlled our carrying capacity, and we're figuring out how to make it go even further this way. And that's why our population has taken off. But it could just as easily one day something goes, but there's no more oil, so pew. And until we figure out how to replace all the products that we get from oil and all the technology we get from oil, our population is going to be down here. I don't know. You might think that would be a bad thing, but who knows? There are people who think it's a good idea. I'm kidding. Well, am I? Because look, this is man-made. It might not be. This could have happened accidentally. This could have been a landslide or something, but this is probably man-made. Either a fire went through here, or they went through there and they logged it. I don't know. But the thing is that we change our environment all the time. And when an environment changes, it typically changes the carrying capacity. Most of the time it brings the carrying capacity down. Sometimes it'll make it go up. It's kind of weird. But most of the time it'll make the carrying capacity go down. And as a result, carrying capacity goes down, species drops, and the ecosystem has to recover. Now, I'm sure you can imagine that if you gave this 300 years, you come back 300 years from now, you won't be able to hardly tell this happened. Okay, and then the populations of all the species that live here could have recovered back to the state they were before this happened. But the problem is we're doing this a lot. We're deforesting and all over the place, and we're tearing down habitat to build condominiums or Chuck E. Cheese's or something at a frightening rate. And as a result, we are having overall, our populations are dropping, and we are now facing what's called a mass extinction. And there have been 6 mass extinctions. I think it's 6, might have been 5. There have been 6 mass extinctions in history of the earth, and they were all around. All of the mass extinctions happened before humans got here. The last one was when the dinosaurs got killed off by that comet or asteroid or whatever. We're right now in the middle of them, but all of the mass extinctions that happened before now were not caused by man. They were just natural. God said, here, kill this, and here, hit that planet with a rock, and it killed off lots of things. But right now, this is being caused by man. Man and his destruction of habitat and all kinds of things that man is doing is causing the populations to drop to the point where we're having extinctions happen way faster than what's called the background rate. We're having a lot more extinctions occur on Earth than we've ever had before, and it's kind of a scary situation. So there are lots of changes that affect populations, and sometimes it affects them to go so low that they go extinct. And there's tons of extinct organisms directly caused by man. The dodo bird is an example. There are no more dodo birds. They're all gone. We decided they were fun to shoot, so we shot them all. And the bald eagle was almost that way. Between the chemicals used and farmers shooting, the bald eagles almost went away. The condor was almost, because of habitat destruction mostly, but the condor was almost totally extinct. We're pulling that thing back. But all of that, everything I just said was caused by humans. I don't know, go figure. So here's a few things. Like, natural disasters always happen, and natural disasters are just things that are caused without humans. Humans didn't do this, and this happens long before humans came along. It happened long after we're gone. And so this is natural, this is normal, and if this causes a change in population, well, then that's what happens, right? Because I did that because nature does these things themselves. Nature has its own limiting factors, things that cause the population to go down or up, depending. But lately humans have been really taking and doing more than Mother Nature ever intended. Okay, for example, human exploitation. Here's one example. We're overfishing like crazy. We're having to go further and further out into the ocean and do more and more fishing to get more and more fish, because we can go to Red Lobster and get a fish dinner for $12, where if we had to pay more for that, there'd probably be less fishing and more fish in the ocean. So go figure. Now, I like to go get my $12 fish dinner, so I hate to complain, except that ultimately, if everybody lived the way I live, we're going to be making fish go extinct and everything else go extinct. Heck, I'm doing my best to make cows go extinct. But human exploitation is one of them. Just using resources more than can be recovered. That's the biggest thing. And it could be catching fish. It could be agriculturally speaking, which is we're destroying natural habitat to make artificial habitat like pastures and stuff and groves to grow food. Well, everywhere we did that, there used to be an ecosystem that got destroyed. Okay, my family did it. We turned a whole pine forest into a big pasture so we could grow cows. And I freely admit what happened, but we make cows, and cows are good, right? Logging, cutting down more trees than can recover. Construction is tearing down habitats to build parking lots. This is what humans are doing, okay? And some examples of that would be things like habitat loss. I mean, look at this. This used to look just like that, okay? But because we wanted those trees, we came in here and cut it down. Or maybe there was something underneath this, like gems or metal or ore or oil or something. And so we cut all this down so we can do something to it. Well, a lot of population loss right here simply because of the fact that we are tearing down and destroying the habitat. Disease is another one. Now, disease is not typically, well, it's hard to say. You may think, well, disease is natural. Man didn't cause disease, but creating difficult situations like exploitation, habitat loss, and a few other things, like over here they're going to talk about climate change, that can put these things under stress, and then the organisms may not be getting the disease that's caused by man, but man can be causing them to be stressed out enough to catch the disease worse. Disease can definitely cause a habitat drop. In fact, in the Appalachian Mountains, there used to be what was it called, the hickory nut tree or something, and one day, and this was just totally natural, but one day a virus comes through and kills off every daggone one of them. They're gone forever. And a third of the trees in the Appalachian Mountains used to be this, whatever this thing was called. Now they're all gone. And this was like in the 1940s. Sometimes it just happens. But humans are making it worse. Of course, climate change. Now, you may have your own feelings about climate change. I know I do. But I do believe this. No matter what you say, the Earth is getting warmer. Now, whether that's being caused by humans or whether that's some kind of natural cycle. By the way, there has been tons of evidence that natural cycles have occurred over and over again in the past. And we do fit the current climate model could be natural. I'm just telling you it could be natural. No scientist is going to tell you that it's natural, because we're throwing tons of carbon in the air because of using things like fossil fuels and stuff. But the Earth was warming incredibly. We were already in a warming trend, and that warming, had nothing to do with humans. But lately, it just so happens that towards the very end of this warming trend was when we started burning all these fossil fuels, and so there's a kind of a danger of putting us into runaway global warming as opposed to just warming and then cooling like the trend has been. In fact, if you were to look at climate data going back for billions of years, if this were natural, we would be on the very verge of an ice age. I mean, like literally starting just in a few decades. But because scientists believe that humans are burning fuels and stuff like that and causing all this environmental damage, that it's actually having an effect in making the global warming worse. So anyway, global warming can cause lots of problems. It causes some species to outgrow others. It causes problems for species that live in colder climates, like the polar bears. Now, there's people who say that that's fake right there, that's just normal. There's just two polar bears standing on an ice floe, and right over here there's tons of ice. But there has been a lot of evidence suggesting that there's been less ice at the poles, especially at the North Pole. I mean, these poor polar bears are probably struggling, and it would do us good to do our very best to avoid the warming that's going on, whether it's caused by humans or not. So anyway, all these things can cause population loss or population change, right? Specifically population loss. Here's another one, invasive species. Invasive species are not like man-made or anything. It's just they have a place where they come from, and they were part of an ecosystem, and that ecosystem had things that kept them in control. It had limiting factors that kept them from growing out of control. But you take them out of that place and you put them somewhere else, those limiting factors may not be there, and then they can just grow like crazy. This is the water hyacinth. Okay, we should know what this is because they grow like crazy all through Lake Okeechobee. Somebody brought them here one time back in the 30s or 20s because they thought it was pretty, and it actually does have a pretty flower. Next thing you know, took off like crazy. This is not normal to see this floating on Lake Okeechobee, but what do you do? And so, and it has a huge effect because where there used to be a thriving ecosystem, now there's just this, and it can actually kill a lake. And so there's been a lot of an attempt to control it, and it is just not easy to control. They spray like crazy. They spray this stuff all the time, and it kills it. But then a couple of weeks later, there's more. And they do this because they compete for resources with the native species. The native species are doing fine, but all of a sudden these come along, and what resources they compete for? They compete for nutrients. They compete for light. And the natural grasses that used to grow here aren't growing here anymore because these things are, and it causes real problems. There's tons of them. The zebra mussels are a big thing up in the Great Lakes. They came in on the side of a boat from God knows where, and now they're just taking off and really kind of they're really kind of destroying the native mussel habitats that live up there, and they're being replaced with the zebra mussels. And there's all kinds of them. There's the boa constrictors that are down there. The pythons that are growing down in the Everglades. It's all out of control stuff, right? Invasive species can enter a habitat in several ways. Sometimes it's an intentional introduction. Sometimes they did it on purpose, not really meaning to cause any harm. But it's like that lady brought that the water hyacinth because it was pretty. But sometimes it's unintentional, and I have to think that the Burmese pythons were unintentional, but they were in a holding facility down in Miami, and they were being raised as pets. Crazy daggone people bought them as pets. But when Hurricane Andrew went through, it destroyed the facility, and they all just slithered off into the Everglades. And ever since then, and that was 1990, I think. And what's that been? We're coming up on 30 years, over 30 years since Hurricane Andrew. And these things have had 30 years of growing and reproducing in a place that doesn't have any limiting factors, or not as many limiting factors as to where they came from, which is, India. And so as a result, they grow out of control, and they're eating everything. And when there used to be a thriving ecosystem, now there's just a bunch of daggum snakes eating everything. And so it creates a real problem. And we need to do our very best to control these. It would be nice if we could totally eradicate the pythons. I don't think we ever will. More than likely, they'll just become part of the ecosystem after doing tons of damage for hundreds of years. But you can go down there, and if you want to go hunt pythons, you can. And they're down there, and I don't get in the water anymore because yeah, that right there. A third thing is losses or changes to habitat. And like I said, whenever we tear up a habitat and damage it, or it's totally gone, then it changes the food supply. It changes the shelter or the other resources for organisms. And they can't thrive, so they die. Or they have to move and they go compete somewhere else, and that creates another problem. So yeah. Hey, if you think all this is cool, you might want to consider what's become called a systems ecologist. This is somebody who studies ecosystems at a level of a large size. They study not just one population. Like, I know a guy who was an alligator biologist. He just studied alligators, and they had to know about all the ecosystem, but he only mostly focused on alligators. I know people who mostly focus on fish, right? But systems ecologists focus on the whole thing, every single aspect of the entire ecosystem. And that's a really cool thing, because it gives us an idea of what factors are causing damage, how we can maybe save it, how we can maybe adjust this and tweak that to where it's not so damaging to the ecosystem. And they know a lot, and I know a few people that do this. And they've tried to, for example, the Kissimmee Prairie Preserve state park north of town is conserving what's called a dry prairie habitat. There's very few dry prairie habitats left east of the Mississippi, and it's one of them. And there are certain things that only live there. And so I know a guy who is an expert on the dry prairie habitat. He's a systems ecologist. He knows everything about the dry prairie habitat. And so he's spent his life studying that particular ecosystem, and he knows what to do. There are people who know the Everglades. There are people who know, jungles and mountains and even Arctic ecosystems. And so something you might want to consider doing, because it's a really neat job, and you get to learn a lot and be outside a lot. You get to learn a lot about one particular ecosystem, and you learn all about all parts of it, not just the biotic factors like the plants and the animals, but you also get to learn about the abiotic factors, the climate, the geology. And then you kind of become a conservation ecologist, which is your goal is to conserve that particular habitat, like that guy up on the prairie. And yeah, we need them because we're having a lot of damage done to our ecosystems around the world. All right, I think that wraps it up. Is there one more slide? No, that wraps it up. So yeah, you need to do all this stuff. When I grade it, if you didn't do it, I give you a 0. So you need to do all those things. All right, everybody. That wraps up this, and so go get to work.